Safety.
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 The safety.
Safety. Safety.
The safety.
Safety. Safety.
Safety.
Safety.
Safety.
Safety.
Safety.
Safety.
Safety.
Safety.
Safety. Safety. Safety.
Ofcom have the power to enforce safety standards at the level set in the bill on any platform of any size.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
So if you tried to use the internet in the UK recently, you've probably been hit with a screen just like this. So the main reason why is because of a new law that's come into effect called the Online Safety Act. Now, technically, this law has been on the books since 2023, but it's only recently that it's been amended and it's actually starting to be enforced. So if we take a look at what the government says this act is meant to provide, it says it's the strongest protections designed for children, and platforms will be required to prevent children from accessing harmful and age-inappropriate content and provide parents and children with clear and accessible ways to report problems online when they do arise. So if you read the sort of government line on this, it seems pretty reasonable, at least on the face of it, right? But the reality is that this is not the Online Safety Act. This is the Online Censorship Act. And the reality is that the safety for supposedly children is really just being used as a guise for tyranny. And thankfully, people are starting to see this. As you can see, the petition, literally only a few days after the act came into force, already has 300,000 signatures. So thankfully, people are seeing through the supposed, the moral panic that is mostly used for most laws of like, think of the children. But people are seeing through that 300,000 signatures in just a few days. And when the law first came into effect 2 days ago, this was at 80,000 signatures. So in literally 2 days, it's already gained almost 200,000 or just over that. So, and again, the initial justifications seem fine, right? Protecting children. Nobody on the face of it is going to be opposed to that. If you say to someone, hey, look, this is the law, it's going to protect children, 99.9% of people are going to be like, yeah, sure, put the law through, no problem. But the problem is that the collateral damage that this act does is absolutely huge. It doesn't just affect, adult content sites and banning, children from seeing that. It actually applies to many more sites. So if we take a look at who the act actually applies to, you can see that the act applies to a range of websites, apps, and other services, including social media services, consumer file cloud storage and sharing sites like Google Drive, Dropbox, things like that, video sharing platforms, so obviously YouTube, Rumble, all the other sites that are included in that, online forums, so Reddit, any kind of hobby forum that you might go to is going to be under this new legislation, dating services and online instant messaging services, so WhatsApp, Signal, etc. So it's not just, adult sites, right? Because I think if it was just adult sites that are explicitly adult sites, I think most people would be like, okay, fair enough. I would still disagree with the act, which you'll see why in a second, because there are many, the devil's in the details with this act. But if that was just it just affect adult sites, I think most people would be like, okay, fine, good, fair enough. But as you can see, even in the own explainer and this is from the government, it says that it affects essentially all sites. And we're going to look through the legislation in a moment, and you'll see that this is basically an internet-wide application. It's not just adult sites. And in fact, it even affects sites like Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is now challenging the government, trying to get this law repealed or amended in such a way to where it wouldn't affect a site like Wikipedia. And the reason why it affects Wikipedia is because Wikipedia allows user-generated content, right? Anyone can go on Wikipedia and upload or edit things. There are obviously safeguards in place to prevent spam, stuff like that, but some stuff still gets through. But because it has user-generated content, it's now under this new regulation, right? So, and obviously most people would think, okay, well, it's an act that's designed to prevent children from accessing adult content, yet it also affects sites like Wikipedia, right? Which, if anything, is the number one site that you would want children to access, right? The whole point of children going on the internet is for educational purposes, right? So Wikipedia is the ultimate example of an educational site, and yet it's still being affected by this law. And that's kind of goes into the next problem, which is that most people, including politicians, by the way, don't actually read the bills. And because nobody reads bills, that's why we have bad bills like this constantly passing and getting basically no backlash until the actual bill has gone into effect. And by the time the effects of the bill is actually felt, the damage is already done, right? For example, this bill, it's only been a few days, and only when it's actually gone through and the damage is done, we have, hundreds of thousands of signatures to repeal it, but it's already here. The chances that this will get repealed is pretty low, and the damage has basically already been done. And, the problem is that 40 bills have been passed this year, and in most years, about 40 bills are passed a year. So if you divide that by how many days are in a year, it's about 10 days worth of scrutiny for each bill. And these bills are super long. Let's actually take a look at the bill. It will load. If you take a look at the bill, this is the bill here. It's about, it's hundreds and hundreds of lines, thousands of lines. So the reality is, how many people have actually read this? I would suffice to say, probably only the people who have written it have actually read it in full. And that's kind of the problem with Parliament and the way that it works. That again, only 10 days per bill is allowed to actually scrutinize a bill in full. So realistically, do you think Keir Starmer has read this bill? Probably not. Do you think that Angela Rayner has read this bill? Probably not. Do you think that Kerry Badenoch has read this bill? Probably not. They only have 10 days per bill to read it. And that's if you divide, 40 bills per year by 365 days. In reality, most of the days Parliament isn't sitting. So in reality, it's going to be much less. It's going to be probably a couple of days per bill to actually scrutinize it line by line and debate it. So, and the sheer amount of legislation that's passed is basically a shield to scrutinize it. But let's actually analyze the language of the bill, because this is where the problems really start to appear. So first things first, I skim read it. I didn't read the whole thing, so I guess I'm part of the problem here. But if we search for harmful content, and this is kind of the crux of this bill, you can see the language here. So to understand the nature, let me zoom this in so you guys can see. So basically, this is talking about how Ofcom is going to regulate different platforms. And this is to understand the nature and impact of harmful content and the harmful ways in which regulated services may be used. And again, it says harmful content here is to reduce their exposure and others, exposure to harmful content. Again, what does harmful content mean? Harmful content could mean anything, right? It's a very vague statement. And I mean, this video could be considered technically harmful content, right? Because I'm criticizing the government, therefore it could be harmful, therefore I could be censored, right? So this is the problem with this vague language that is often used in bills, and it gives huge discretion to the government to, and in this case Ofcom, because Ofcom will be the regulator, to regulate what is said on the internet, right? So another thing that I took notice of in the bill is if you look at misinformation, and this is kind of the biggest one. Misinformation here. Advisory Committee on Disinformation and Misinformation. So again, what does misinformation and disinformation actually mean? It's very vague. It could mean anything, right? And then have a committee that's going to be part of Ofcom or approved and appointed by Ofcom, who is going to try to reduce the amount of misinformation online. Now, again, in theory, that sounds great, right? Nobody wants people just actively spreading lies and stuff like that. But again, who decides what is disinformation and misinformation? In this case, it's the government, right? So now you're just giving them even more power and control over what can and cannot be said. And those are the two things that are already pretty bad, this sort of vague language. But this is the worst part of the bill, which is encryption. And nobody has talked about this, as far as I know. So if you look up encrypted on the bill, on the legislation, now again, this is I haven't seen anyone else talk about this, and this is the most important part of the bill, and it's only mentioned 3 times, and I think they've done this for a reason. So again, this is the most important part of the bill. No online media has talked about it that I have seen, or maybe they have, but it's not like the prominent story. If you go on BBC News, Sky News, they're all talking about how this is to protect children and etc. And again, if you're a normie who's not really paying attention, you got stuff to do. I get it. Most people are not reading legislation, but let's actually read what it says. So a person commits an offense if, in response to information notice, and we'll go over information notices in a second because I'll explain that later. But in response to an information notice, the person provides information which is encrypted, such that it is not possible for Ofcom to understand it, or produces a document which is encrypted, such that it is not possible for Ofcom to understand it or the information it contains. So this essentially is banning encryption, not directly but indirectly, and it's greatly damaging to any platform that uses encryption, including WhatsApp. If you think your WhatsApp messages are encrypted, they are technically encrypted, but if Ofcom gives an information notice, they are essentially giving themselves, and by extension the government, a backdoor to encryption. So, and again, this is literally free. It's mentioned in one line, 2 lines. Okay, 2 lines of a 1,000-line bill. Again, I haven't read the whole thing. I've skim read it, I admit, but it's 1,000 lines, and yet only in 2 lines is encryption mentioned. And yet this is probably the most impactful part of the entire legislation. Okay, so now I'm on Wikipedia, and it does actually mention this. So in the 3rd reading of the Lords, it presented information stating that the controversial powers allowing Ofcom to break end-to-end encryption will not be used immediately. So again, this is in 2023, right? So now these laws are actually coming into effect. Ofcom can now actually regulate and essentially break end-to-end encryption. So the provisions pertaining to end-to-end encryption weakening were not removed from the Act, and Ofcom can at any time issue notices requiring the breaking of end-to-end encryption technology. So again, the UK has essentially banned end-to-end encryption. Now, it's interesting that the House of Lords are the ones that were criticizing the essentially the banning of end-to-end encryption, and yet, ironically, Labour are the ones that want to abolish the House of Lords. So, in November 2022, Sir Keir Starmer stated that if elected, the Labour Party would abolish the House of Lords and replace it with an assembly of nations and regions consisting of 200 elected members. Now, it's ironic because, again, the only people that were raising concerns, significant concerns, were the House of Lords. And the House of Lords are like the only people who actually have time because they're not dealing with the day-to-day, rush of politics, doing media rounds, etc. They're the ones who can actually sit down and read a bill line by line. And because they're not elected, they don't have to go on media constantly trying to get re-elected, right? So, and again, ironically, Labour Party wants to get rid of that to essentially make it the House of Commons again. So, because again, if it's consisting of 200 elected members, it's essentially going to be House of Lords. I mean, the House of Commons, right? So you're going to have the same issues where are they going to, do you think these 200 elected members are going to have time to like sit down and read each bill line by line? No, they're going to be doing the same thing the House of Commons members are doing, which is going on media rounds, trying to get media, trying to get attention, trying to get re-elected. So, and here's the thing, right? So it's essentially banned encryption. And what does this remind you of? To me, it reminds me of the US Patriot Act. You don't know what the US Patriot Act was? It was after 9/11, the Bush administration put into effect this act that essentially allowed for the NSA to wiretap US citizens without a warrant, right? That's the summary of the US Patriot Act. And at the time, the excuse was, well, we have to fight terrorism, right? And again, obviously, we all want to fight terrorism. No one's in favor of that. 99.9% of the population are in favor of that. But you see how they use a moral panic. They use a crisis. They use security as an excuse to then abolish the individual citizens' freedom, or in this case, their privacy. Same thing is happening here. They're using the excuse of children's safety, which again, obviously everyone can be in favor of children's safety in the abstract. Yet how they actually apply the law means that they are banning encryption, right? So they're using safety, child safety, as an excuse to ban encryption and to therefore essentially ban privacy and allow for government spying writ large. I mean, that's what this act ultimately is about. It's not about children's safety. Not only does this law, erode privacy, it completely annihilates it. Right? So users, if you want to do anything on any kind of social media platform, you're now going to have to scan your face and give your ID. So essentially a social credit system has been already introduced today. And here's the thing, when you scan your face and your ID, give it to these platforms, this is not going into some sort of government database where you can maybe argue that it's safer with a government database. Now, of course, the irony is recently the UK has had an MOD data breach where personal details of the UK Special Forces have been leaked in a data breach by the Ministry of Defence. So even if the government said, okay, we're going to have this verification service, it's like a government verification service, I'm going to put it on our own servers, they can't even keep their own data, the most classified, important military data safe. You can't expect them to then keep every single person's ID and face safe. But they're not actually doing this. They're actually, now technically they are, because again, they can request, Ofcom can request from information notices people's ID from these companies. So technically, some of this data will be in government databases, which, as we can see, this only happened a few days ago. The government cannot keep their data safe. So they're certainly going to keep your ID safe. But they're actually instead trying to force companies to use these third-party companies to do the age verifications. And again, you either have to trust the government and you have to trust third-party corporations who are not just going to leak your data, but they're going to sell it as well. So we saw this recently with the T app that got leaked, they got hacked, and all of their images, the ID and images got leaked and is now available freely on the internet. You can look it up. And even if, let's hypothetically say that none of these age verification companies get hacked or they get leaked, if they get sold, like 23andMe, they can sell your data, right? So either way, you're getting screwed either way. Either they're going to leak your data, not obviously purposely, but the hackers will hack these sites and get your data, or they'll just sell it to a third party. So essentially privacy has completely gone because of this bill. And not only is it about privacy, but also about anonymity, right? Once your face and your ID are tied to your browsing habits, the government or corporations can essentially track everything, right? So let's say you have a hot topic political issue. Do you think that people are going to dissent from that if they know that the government can see their exact speech online? Of course not, right? This is going to be extremely chilling towards dissent, and it's going to encourage self-censorship, right? Even when I was about to make this video, I was like, did I even make this video? Right? Because I'm criticizing the government. They're going to have my ID. They're going to know exactly who I am. Obviously, I don't think it's got that bad yet, but just think about it in the future, how bad it might get in the future. And again, it's going to allow the government to crack down way more easily on dissidents, right? Because they're going to have your ID. They're going to know exactly who you are. So, and anonymity has always protected people speaking out, right? So if you look at whistleblowers or activists in the past, if you look at the Arab Spring, social media was key to the Arab Spring, allowing people to organize safely without revealing who they were, right? So if you have a dictatorship and you want to organize a protest against that dictatorship online, if you have a certain amount of anonymity, that's going to protect you. Whereas if you try to organize, if you're in Iran and you're trying to organize a anti-government protest on social media, and you say, hey, we're going to protest against the government, but if your ID is known by the government, they're just going to crack down immediately, right? They're going to know exactly who you are, where you live, etc. And that's essentially going to make it much more easier for authoritarian governments to keep control. So let's actually take a look at how this age verification actually works. So I'm going to play this Sky News clip, and they're going to show you how exactly this is going to work.
The hardest one is that one there.
This guy here.
This mask costs £700.
Okay, so this is like, you really, really want to watch something you're not supposed to watch.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and get into the over 18 lobby. I don't understand how it knows that. I look creepy, but I look like a real person. A creepy real person, but like I'm very surprised.
That it knew that I wasn't. But one of people's biggest concerns is about what.
Okay, so obviously they tried to like fool the system with a mask. And, obviously this is in Yoti's office. So Yoti is one of these big companies that are getting now a lot of contracts because of this new law. And they're one of the main age verification companies and services that are being rolled out. And you can see that this journalist went to their offices. I mean, talk about, non-biased journalism. They're actually going to the office of the people who you're trying to scrutinize. And they're in this controlled environment, controlled mask, trying to fool the system. Now, of course, Yoti, they're not going to have a journalist come to the office and show that their system is acting up, right? Obviously, they're going to make sure it's a controlled environment. They're going to use a mask that is obviously a mask. I mean, most AIs are going to be able to detect that is a mask. But here's the thing. This has already been bypassed. If you go on Twitter, you can see this post here where people are literally using Death Stranding. If you don't know what Death Stranding is, it's a video game that has like a photo mode where you can adjust the face of the characters. They're already using, now this wasn't Yoti, this was a different service, but the fact that video games can be used to bypass this, you don't think kids are going to know how to bypass this pretty immediately with just using video games as a mechanism to do that. So, and of course, Yoti, again, they have an incentive to make it look like their systems are unbeatable, right? They're literally as you can see, they're in the Yoti office, right? And of course, the laptop they're using is in their office. We don't know if that's their real system. It could be a demo system that's trained to detect that particular mask, right? Again, it's not a control test. And again, they have an incentive to make their systems look good so they can make more sales. So in fact, we can take a look at their blog. They recently got £12.5 million in funding from HSBC. And over the past 4 years, ending in March 2023, the revenues have gone up 6,000%. So they were making 100 grand, and they're now making £6 million in revenue. Now, of course, it's not profit, but I would assume that, it's an online service, so the margins should be pretty good. And again, this was in 2023. So now that every website has to use some sort of age verification service, otherwise they're going to get fined, huge fines. I think it's like £18 million fines from Ofcom if they're not using one of these services to verify ages. Then what do you think their revenue is going to be now? They haven't. I've tried to find it. I haven't found any public information on their latest revenue. But just from 2023, and again, this was before the act fully became enforced. I mean, their revenue is going to probably going to double, triple, or even more, right? So again, do you think this is about child safety, or do you think it's about Yoti making £6 million pounds in revenue? I think I'll trust your intelligence to see what this is really about. But another thing, let's go back to the video real quick because I found this pretty interesting. About what he says about privacy. So
do a selfie and
And actually, what will happen to the images I've used for this specific trial?
you do a selfie and we tell you that we delete the image. Now, you might worry that we might be lying, but
yeah, we might worry. You might worry, might be lying. Yeah, obviously, people are going to worry that you might be lying. Now, I'm not going to accuse any company of doing that because I'm going to get sued. But I mean, again, there's no verification that they have deleted your information, right?
We would be out of business contractually with companies or with the regulator if we basically promised to all of those people that we were deleting their image instantly and then were found later not to be doing that.
On the 25th.
Yeah. I mean, you can make up your own mind whether you trust this company to actually be deleting your data. But here's the thing that I found pretty ironic. So if you go to a post that they wrote on their blog, let me quickly turn this off. So it says, what would happen to my information if Yoti got hacked? Obviously, it's pretty likely that they will get hacked because they are now a treasure trove, a centralized database of everybody's photos and IDs. So of course, it's going to be a high target for hackers to get that information and sell it. So it says that Yoti stores each shareable piece of your data in an elaborate system of wrapped encryption, which means even if a hacker somehow gained access to our data center, it's extremely unlikely that they could read anyone's details. Now, again, they say that they delete your photos in the video, yet here they're claiming to encrypt it. Now, again, it's a shareable piece of information. So you can assume that, perhaps they create a hash of the photo. They don't actually store the exact photo. They maybe store a hash of it. But I just find that pretty contradictory, right? They're saying that on one hand, they delete all information. On the other hand, it's stored in an encrypted way on their servers. I mean, again, you have to now trust that this is the case. But okay, even if they do delete the photos and it is encrypted, the very act that the Online Safety Act has essentially banned encryption, right? So even if it's encrypted, it doesn't make a difference, right? The government can still access this data. So if we go to, and again, I said that I was going to talk about this earlier, information notices, which is the key power that has been given to Ofcom. So if I go back to the legislation and I search information notices, this is the part of the regulation or the act that considers information notices. So let's read this. Ofcom may, by notice under the subsection, require a person within the subsection to provide them with any information that they require for the purpose of exercising or deciding whether to exercise any of their online safety functions. So again, it's not even that they decided it, they need to exercise it, but whether they're deciding to exercise it, right? So even the law gives them huge leeway with how they can make these information notices. But essentially, it gives them the power to require a person within the subsection to obtain or generate information, provide information about the use of a service by a named individual. Now, this is the key part, right? Provide information about the use of a service by a named individual. So basically, Ofcom can issue an information notice to any of these companies and say, we need information about XYZ, and we need to know exactly what they've been doing with your service, right? Again, I remember before when I looked at the encrypted section, we look up encrypted again. So again, a person commits an offense if they provide information which is encrypted, such that it's not possible for Ofcom to understand it. So if Ofcom issues an information notice to a company and they have the information they have is encrypted, but if they give that encrypted information to Ofcom, they're committing an offense. So you see how this is essentially a backdoor into encryption, because now the companies have to store unencrypted information in case they get an information notice by Ofcom, and they then have to give the unencrypted information to Ofcom, right? So when Yoti says that it's encrypted on their blog, they say it's wrapped encryption, but they have to have at least some information that's unencrypted in case they get a information notice by Ofcom. And again, this information notice is essentially a backdoor into encryption. Another thing is that if they send an information notice to a company, they can do it in secret. In the legislation, there's nowhere that says that these information notices have to be made public. So Ofcom can, and I would guess that they already have, issue information notices to all of these major platforms, all of the age verification platforms, all of the main social media platforms, and these notices are confidential, right? And so that means it's entirely possible that they've already acquired age verification firms and all these other platforms to undermine encryption. They've already given these information notices out, and they're already collecting data on individuals. Again, I can't prove that, but the way that they've written the laws means that's totally possible. And the public would have no way of actually knowing that that's the case. It would just be mass surveillance. And again, the law is written in such a way to where the public would be none the wiser. So another thing that is pretty curious and a little bit suspicious about this legislation is that the written evidence. So if you don't know how UK Parliament works, whenever there's a law going through, before the law actually goes to Parliament, or while it's in Parliament, there'll be a call for written evidence to be submitted by basically anyone. It could be an individual, it could be a company. And Yoti actually, the service that we were just looking at, okay, this service in the video, they actually submitted written evidence while the legislation was going on. And this is what we call lobbying, right? So they were lobbying the government to encourage this law to be passed. Now, why do you think that is? Do you think that they, just out of the goodness of their own heart, were like, oh, this is a great law, but we, a corporation, are going to spend our time writing written evidence to Parliament? And again, this is from Parliament. I'll show you the URL. Well, I'll put a link in the description. But do you think that Yoti was out of the goodness of their own heart writing this written evidence that, if you read it, is very pro the bill? And it's actually encouraging the bill to be even wider in its enforcement, trying to get as many companies to be under this new Ofcom regulation that would require them to hire a service like Yoti to have age verification. So, and when I was reading it, there's a particular quote that was quite telling. Here we go. So it says, I'll zoom in so you guys can see. And again, this is written by Yoti, right? We also welcome the bill's positive focus to mandate platforms and firms to produce clearer terms and conditions. Okay, that's not inherently bad. And by encouraging stricter identity and age verification procedures at the onboarding stage. Now, let's think. Why would a age verification provider that's making £6 million in revenue, why would they want to tell the government that there should be stricter identity or age verification procedures at the onboarding stage? Let's think, right? Obviously, we know why, right? This obviously is going to directly benefit the company if this law gets passed, and is going to force every other company that's under this legislation to hire a company like Yoti. Now, it gets even worse. Okay, so that's just one company that is lobbying the government to pass a law that directly benefits them. But let's also look at another piece of written evidence. Again, this is all from Parliament, from the official Parliament website. Okay, I'll link it in the description. So this is written evidence submitted by the Age Verification Providers Association. Again, all of this is written evidence in the Online Safety Act when it was being initially written. And again, you guys can read this. I'm going to read all of it because it's going to take too long. But essentially, it was very much in favor of the law. Okay, they were saying essentially the similar types of things to the Yoti written evidence, basically saying that yes, this law is great, and we should have even more regulation to make sure that even more platforms are forced to use age verification services. So again, if we go back to this written evidence by the Age Verification Providers Association, and that sounds like a very like normal group. You would think it's like some sort of charitable group or an NGO or something like that may have good intentions. But who is this? Who's a member of this association? Well, if we go and look at the AVPA website and we take a look at the members, you can see a full list of their members. And oh, what do you know? Yoti is in the membership, right? Along with all of these other large, massive corporations that are going to benefit directly because they all offer age verification services. So Yoti, Fujitsu, by the way, Fujitsu was involved in one of the largest IT scandals in the UK, the Horizon post office scandal that put hundreds of people in prison falsely. So when you're in a group with Fujitsu, it's not exactly the most honest group, in my opinion. And again, all of these companies are going to benefit from this law being passed, and they're submitting written evidence to the government to support this law. So do you really think this is about protecting children? Or do you think it's about all of these companies making millions, if not billions, of pounds of profit from these government mandated contracts? I'll let you be the judge. Now, another thing that you should take into consideration is that smaller sites cannot actually afford these services, right? These services by Yoti, it costs a lot. I don't know the actual price, but it's going to be in the thousands. Now, another side effect of this law is that smaller sites are not going to be able to afford the services of, these companies to do age verification. So what do you think that these companies are going to do? They're going to most likely shut down. And in fact, we've seen thousands of websites blocking UK users or shutting down completely because they cannot afford the onerous verification processes or services that this new regulation requires. And again, if these smaller websites don't comply with some sort of age verification process, they can get fined by Ofcom for either, I can't remember the exact number, but it was either, I think it's £18 million, it was millions, or they can get fined 10% of their global revenue, right? So extremely punitive measures can be put in place by Ofcom if they don't implement one of these companies who have been lobbying the government to implement this bill. if they don't pay for their services, right? And a small forum, for example, may only make enough from ads and membership just to pay for the hosting or the maintenance of their site. They may only, they're not going to have enough to pay for the services of like a Yoti, for example, right? I don't know the prices of Yoti services, but if they're making £6 million in revenue, I would assume that their service is not going to be cheap, right? It's going to be a significant amount, again, especially for a smaller website or small forum or something like that. In fact, even in the petition, it's clamping down on sites like forums that talk about trains and footballs, video games, stuff like that. These are small forums, like hobby forums, that are not going to be making millions of pounds of revenue, and yet they are still forced. There's no exemption or exception. If you have user-generated content, you're going to be forced to pay for a service like Yoti. And so this is another example of how government regulation creates monopolies. Okay, so I'm mostly kind of a libertarian in my political views, and this is a perfect example, right? When people say we have a free market, is this a free market? Is when this group of conglomerates essentially lobby the government. This is regulatory capture. This is not a free market. This is a group of companies coming together to force a legislation through that is directly going to benefit them, and the government is happy to go along with it. Now, another thing is that Yoti even, and I know it's the Guardian, so it's somewhat biased, but bear with me. It has a good point. In this article, it says that Yoti. Here we go. Yoti also gave £10,000, £12,000 of benefits in kind, sponsoring a parliamentary group on digital identity. Okay, so this is basically a group where a bunch of politicians went around digital identity, and they probably paid for the catering and the whatever was required for this group. And again, do you think that it was a forum to discuss digital identity? So essentially, they paid for a nice party for politicians to go to with 10 to 20 to 12 grand of benefits in kind to sponsor this event. Again, it was by Yoti Limited. Okay, do you think they're just doing that out of the kindness of their heart because they care about digital identity? They just want to have they just want to give away 10 grand to 12 grand willy-nilly? No, of course, they're doing that because they expect return on their investment. I mean, that's not that much. I mean, it's kind of pathetic, UK lobbying. 10 grand, 12 grand, that's like barely anything. Most US companies are giving away millions, if not billions, to politicians. So, I mean, I guess that's something where our politicians are cheap, I guess. But, Yoti's not doing this out of the kindness of their heart. They're doing it because they're going to make £6 million in revenue, or more than that. That was, again, 2 years ago. So now it's probably 10x that, probably. Let's take a look at the workarounds. Again, people are already easily finding workarounds. I already showed you guys how people are using that video game to bypass the verification checks. But there's many other easier workarounds. So the first workaround is a VPN. I'm sure that many of you have heard of a VPN. Don't worry, it's not an ad for a VPN. But you can see by Proton VPN, this is the UK chart for VPN searches or usage. You can see it had a huge spike, literally just a day or on the day of the bill becoming enforced. So already, if the argument is that this bill is to protect children, most children are pretty tech savvy. They're going to know what a VPN is. They probably already use VPNs. So immediately this law is completely easily worked around, right? Like no kid who's using the internet is going to be like, oh, what's a VPN? I wonder what that is. No, they're going to know exactly what it is and they're going to use it, right? So the amount, again, remember, encryption is now banned. That's the real crux of this bill. No one's talking about it. People talking about VPNs and all these other things. Of course, if you use a VPN, again, that's not exactly great for privacy, right? You're essentially funneling all of your search data into a private server that's owned by a third-party company, right? And again, using a VPN is pretty easy. So this is Proton VPN. Again, it's not an ad. Okay, I just use it generally. Okay, you can simply connect to a server, and in a few seconds, boom, I'm now in the Netherlands, right? And now I can access as if I was in the Netherlands. You can connect to a US server as well. Okay, so the triviality to work around this bill just shows how ineffective it is, right? And yet again, the ultimate effect of banning encryption is still in place, right? So that's one workaround. The second workaround is Tor, right? You can use a Tor browser. Now I'm using Brave browser, but you can download the actual official Tor browser too. But on Brave, it's very trivial. You just open here, new private tab with Tor, and boom, you're now connected with Tor. So that's probably the best method, the best workaround in terms of privacy and anonymity. But of course, if any of you have used a Tor browser before, it's pretty slow. and because it has to route your traffic through all these different onion servers. And of course, you often get captured with like, prove you're not a robot, etc., because they can see that you're coming from an onion server. So it's slow, kind of annoying, but that is a pretty trivial workaround. And the next part is, the dark web, right? Ironically, by making these surface sites like Twitter or any of the major platforms, by making them harder to access, you're only going to push people to the dark web, which is even more dangerous, right? So again, if the idea was to protect children, you're pushing them to a more dangerous part of the internet, which is pretty ironic, right? So if we take a look at the bigger picture, though, the restrictions that are being placed on ordinary citizens are wildly disproportionate to the goal of protecting children, right? Which should and can already be done more effectively by parents. So I want to take a look at a video real quick. This is by the NSPCC. And this to me was like the perfect example of the nanny state, right? So this is NSPCC, which is pro the bill. Let's take a look at the video. Oh, and because I'm using a VPN now, let me disconnect from the VPN. It's getting captured. So again, this is the problem, right? If you use a workaround, you're going to have to be constantly doing these captures.
Net for the first time. How robust do you think these measures will be? How confident do you think that they'll work completely?
Well, good afternoon. For too long, parents have had to shoulder the burden of keeping their children safe online. Today, that responsibility moves decisively to Ofcom, the online safety watchdog. So new laws...
Okay, I mean, just think about how ridiculous that statement was. For too long, parents have had to shoulder the responsibility of being parents. And now the Ofcom says that, no, you don't need to have the responsibility of being a parent. Ofcom will be your new parent, right? I mean, this is the ultimate epitome of the nanny state, right? Again, the fact that these are the arguments that people who are in favor of this bill are making, it just shows the absurdity of this new law. So anyway, if you actually wanted to protect children, right, which of course is a noble endeavor, the answer is not, as this guy says, to give Ofcom the responsibility to be the new parent. The real way is to actually be a better parent. I mean, I'm sorry, that's the reality, right? Parental locks and software already exists on every single device to, have some sort of parental lock or some sort of restriction to sites that the parents deem harmful. You can already do that. That's been around for decades. Parental locks, parental software, that already exists. So I don't really see the need for this law, right? It'll be more effective for the government to push for people to use these parental locks. The government and Ofcom estimate that £169 million has already been spent to set up the enforcement, and the cost that businesses would face from paying these services like Yoti would be about $2.5 billion or billion pounds over 10 years. So imagine if that spending was actually spent on like an education campaign in schools for parents to like teach parents how to set up parental locks on their devices. That would be way cheaper and it'd be way more effective, right? That would have made way more sense than this law. And another thing, all of the major parties were in favor of this law. So Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, Greens. There was no party in Parliament that was against this bill. So you kind of know that you're getting screwed when every single mainline party is agreeing on something. And, the final hypocrisy, I'll end on this. Okay. Labour has recently lowered the voting age to 16, right? Yet you are required to view supposedly harmful content. Or I'll even say yes, okay, harmful content. But you're required to be 18. So where's the consistency there? Where's the logic? Either you're a child and you shouldn't be viewing harmful content. So the government says you need to be 18, yet they're saying that the child that can't view supposedly harmful content can vote, right? So again, this is just ultimate hypocrisy and no consistent principles being applied. And it kind of shows that, again, this is not about protecting children. This is about the state gaining more control and regulatory capture, ensuring that these companies can earn millions of pounds from it. And again, finally, I'll actually end on this. The government wanted to protect children. They would have prosecuted Prince Andrew, right? He was affiliated with one of the biggest, I won't say it because I don't want this video to get flagged, but you know what? Okay. And he was not investigated. Government said, nothing to see here. No investigation, no prosecution, no charges will be faced. So instead of prosecuting or charging actual, potential, alleged criminals, they pass a ban that all but bans encryption and guts freedom of speech and guts privacy, while essentially giving all of the powers to Ofcom to make them, the new Ministry of Censorship. So that kind of tells you everything you need to know. So again, I'll end the video here. If you guys want to have a chance of ending this bill or repealing this bill, you can go and sign this petition. I'll put a link in the description. It's only been 2 days since this bill has come into force. It's already gotten 300,000 signatures. So hopefully in the next few days before it has to be debated in Parliament, it will get, let's hope, millions potentially of signatures, and that will put pressure on the government to actually repeal this bill. I'm not going to hold my breath because the government seems pretty steadfast in their supporting of this bill, and all of the major parties support it. So I wouldn't hold my breath, but hopefully if you sign this petition, it will at least increase the chances somewhat that this bill will get repealed. So I'll end the video here, guys. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.